Welcome to another episode of Chatting with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Dave Iacovetti Jr. What's up, Dave?
How are you, Bill?
How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be
Yeah,
here.
no problem, man. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time for me. A lot of people are
Anytime, Bill.
anticipating this interview, and yeah, to everyone out there, I hope you guys are having a good holiday, and I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. And so, where do you want to start, man? There's so much to get into.
Well, it's funny. My dad, as they know, everyone knows, is from Brooklyn. My mom's from Georgia, and I was born in Baltimore on the Mason-Dixon line. And that's where my parents had met. Ironically, she was pregnant with me in New York, but then she didn't want me born in New York, so she went to Baltimore, and that's where I was born. And that was 1964, so that's the beginning.
Yeah. So, when's the first time you met your father?
The first time I remember actually meeting him was, I guess, 1969, 1970. My father was in with Papa Doc Duvalier, and he was running boats of, they called them junkets with gamblers to Haiti. And we had just got to Miami, and a storm had come through and knocked out the power. And I had to see him by candlelight. It was my birthday, and I'm pretty sure it was my sixth birthday or fifth birthday. And I had to see him by candlelight. And then after that, I didn't get to see my father again until I was 14. I talked to him on the phone, but he was in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary during that time. So I had to kind of uh, grow up without him. My mother was mom and dad. And my big thing with knowing about my father was either from what my grandfather would tell me about him, or my uncles would tell me about him, or going to the library and reading about him in books. And
Yeah.
that's what I found was pretty amazing, that my dad, we had the same name, is in all these books at the library with all these famous people, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., you name them, my dad knew them.
Yeah. So finally, when you when your father was away, were you going and visiting him in the penitentiaries and stuff?
My mother tried to take us once to visit him in Atlanta, and I wrote about it in my book. I wrote a book about him a couple of years ago. It went to #1 in Amazon's organized crime biographies.
Yeah.
Um, and I talked about it in the book, where they wouldn't let her in. So my mom, never being one to take no for an answer, got on the phone and got the warden on the phone from a payphone. And how it happened, I don't know, but the warden brought my father to the phone, and I got to talk to him on the telephone. And I remember that like yesterday. Um, and we ended that conversation is that he would be getting out soon, and to take care of my mom and little sister until he did. And then I didn't see him again until um, I was 14, and as he was coming out of the penitentiary, they were putting me behind bars. Literally, the same time frame he got out of the penitentiary, I went in at 14.
Yeah. So,
So
you were a crime boss as a kid. You were trying to be one, right?
I was trying to be. I was
Yeah.
for a minute.
So you want
Yeah,
to
I
explain
had read
what
all.
the whole situation? Yeah, you want to explain what happened with the
Sure, of course. I had been so enthralled with the stories of my father and his cronies and how they would do the things that they would do, that I started emulating them as a teenager. And there was a guy, he was called Larry the Garbage Man. My mom was a waitress at a royal, it's called the Royal Hungarian Kosher Restaurant on Miami Beach. It was a famous little spot. And while she's at work, me and my sister would hang out on Washington Avenue, which is the main drag of Miami Beach, like a mini New York, if you will, down there. They got the delicatessens, the fruit stands, the pizza parlors. So I grew up there, but I got involved with crime, and Larry the garbage man would bring me credit card receipts. I'd give him $1 for every one. And back then they didn't check authorizations and stuff, so I had 100 different credit card numbers. I was ordering everything from parakeets to Atari games. I was the first kid on my block with an
This
Atari
was
game.
over the phone, right? You're ordering
Yeah,
them over the phone. Yeah.
yeah. I could change my voice. I could sound like an old man. I could sound like a Cuban refugee. Um, I always had that acting bug in me, and I was using it for all the wrong reasons. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it was fun for a minute.
I mean, for you to pull that off as a 14-year-old kid, man, that's insane.
Yeah, it was going great. I mean, I took down a lot of money. I had my own treasure chest full of diamonds and Mexican 50 pesos gold coins I had ordered. I mean, I'd go to my PO box and there'd be an ounce of gold almost every day that I had ordered from this one or ordered from that one. Um, Canine attack dog, I ordered one of those. He was my best friend for 12 years. He's in that picture that you have of me and him there. But then I branched out and I started impersonating an IRS agent and collecting back taxes from people that didn't owe them, and that's never good. Um,
How did you pull that off, being 14 and having to see these people? Like,
yeah, so I could change my voice, like I said, so these people would think they're talking to an IRS office. And then I would tell them, to save them the trouble of coming to the office, we would send Johnny Mason out, the office boy, and he'd meet them at their bank, and they could just pay him there, and he'd give them a receipt, and off they went. I'd walk them to the taxis. No one was ever hurt. Anything
yeah.
I ever did criminal wise was, I don't want to say victimless, but no one was physically harmed. Their wallets got harmed maybe, but they weren't physically harmed. So that went on for a good while,
Here's the
and then
picture of the dog.
yeah, Savior was his name. He saved my butt a bunch of times. I taught him in German how to, you know, attack, stop, etc. Uh, he was literally my best friend, that dog. But anyway, so after a while of doing this, people were catching on, and they put together a task force. They flew in Secret Service guys from New York, IRS agents from Atlanta, Metro Dade, Miami Police Department with Miami Beach, and they had a task force looking for this ring of people that were taking money as, pretending to be the IRS. And eventually, they caught me. They caught me, and I confessed to everything. Uh, but they were very surprised, to say the least, that someone that young, especially in the 70s, this was 1978, would pull something like that off. And my father, who had absolutely nothing to do with it, he had just got home, God bless him. He told me years later, he goes, son, if I had been driving down the street and seen you walking along and innocently said, get in the car, let me give you a ride home,
Yeah.
because they would have never believed that I wasn't part of that. You make me
Yeah.
nervous, son.
Yeah, he would have went right back. He would have went right back.
Yeah.
Been no questions.
Yeah. So yeah, I got in trouble, and then I had to go into a program. The state attorney at the time was Janet Reno. Later, she would become the head of the Justice Department under Bill Clinton. The reporter that reported on my case was a Pulitzer Prize winning true crime reporter. She went on to win a Pulitzer Prize a few years later. Edna
Do you remember?
Buchanan.
Do you remember the day they came for you?
Oh yeah. Do I? Um, well, I've always had a bit of a psychicness about me, and that day I just knew something wasn't right. First of all, the lady, uh, she wanted to meet at a different bank because, in my little word game, I would find out where their bank was, if their husband was still alive, blah, 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 whatever it was. And I thought it was odd that she wanted me to meet her at a bank that I knew wasn't hers, you know. So I already knew that was. And I remember looking down, and below my feet there was a trail of ants, and they were walking between my feet while I was waiting for her to show up. And there was a lizard there, and he was just frozen, and he didn't move. But every couple of ants, he'd swoop down and eat one of them, and then he'd pop back up and just sit there. And then, you know, and I go, man, this just ain't right, man. Something about that just freaked me out. So I get up, and I was actually going to leave and just forget about the money, because they were like anywhere from $2 to $5 grand in cash each time that I did it. And there she was, and she just handed me an envelope. She didn't count it out like most of the other people. When the office boy would meet them, they would count out the money. I had a toy typewriter that belonged to my sister. I'd type out a receipt from the I mean, it was totally, you know, they laughed about it later, the cops, but they weren't laughing up to that point. So I knew something was wrong, and I was leaving, and I had a briefcase, and I put the envelope in my briefcase, and she started looking all around, and I was like, oh, hell no. You know, I just started walking down Washington Avenue. I got to 11th Street. I made a right, and I looked over my shoulder, and back then detectives all drove LeBarons. They had handlebar mustaches, most of them, you know,
Yeah.
and theirs, sure enough, looked like Tom Selleck, man, in a LeBaron, and he was on a mic. Back then they had like the radios in the car, and he was talking on the mic. So I cut down a couple of buildings, and there was a little alley between them, and I could see at the end of the alley was a taxi cab. And I said, geez, I'll throw that guy $100. I'll be out of here. Let me make it to that taxi cab. I never made it to the taxi cab.
No, they got you.
I came out.
Got you.
I came out between those two buildings, and there he was, man. He had to be, to me, he looked like he was 10 feet tall, and he had a 45 automatic chrome 45, and he stuck it right between my eyes, and he goes, hit the ground. And man, I hit that ground, and as I did, there was guys coming with shotguns down the alley. A helicopter was flying over. Cars were screeching to halt all around me. I mean, it was a movie scene. And they go, get the cab driver, get the fucking cab driver. And they yanked this guy right through the driver's side window and fling him up against the hood, and they're getting ready to stuff him. And he reaches under his shirt and pulls out a badge. I'm a cop. I'm a cop.
Yeah. They probably thought he was involved with you.
And they thought he was my getaway guy. So I wouldn't have made it far if I had got to the taxi cab. Man. But at that point, they got all these guns on me. And I guess the head guy looked down. He said, how old are you? And I went, 14. And he goes, oh, gee, get the cuffs off him. And they took the cuffs off me and, you know, gave me some water. And, you know, they were all like nice to me. Who put you up to this, kid? And when they found out no one had put me up to it, they were really, really upset.
They probably felt like idiots, you know. They probably felt like total idiots, man.
Well, yeah, you know, they were disappointed there wasn't a bunch of guys, you know, drinking coffee, waiting around the corner for the money to arrive, you know. But just my little sister and my dog. But it'll make a hell of a movie. So, you know, that inspired me to, you know, get into the movie business. And I was lucky. I got to be in Porky's. I got to be in Absence of Malice, meet Paul Newman, Sally Field as an extra. You know, Scarface. I was on the set of Scarface. Got to be around Pacino. That was fun. And that showed me, along with the jail doors closing behind me, that I didn't want to be a criminal. Yeah, there I am, right behind him there. My moment of fame, my second of fame.
Hey man, that's a iconic movie.
Yeah, I loved it. I worked on it for 2 weeks, and it was a high point of my life for sure. The funny thing that a lot of people don't know is that's my dad. Me and Ciro DiPaggio have a TV series that he's producing that goes into detail in a fictional way about his latter life here in Miami and some of the things that went on. It's called Silent Partners. Looking for that to come out hopefully very soon. There he is. There's a young Ciro DiPaggio. So my dad again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now as I'm older here, and I have several books that are going to be coming out in the next year or two. A couple of films, a couple of documentaries. A lot of them are true crime oriented. Um, I get to bring some of those stories that I've seen and experienced and heard about to life on the silver screen. Whether it be a flat screen or a theater screen, and I'm excited about that. Really looking forward to doing that. And Ciro's having a lot of success with his projects, Mob King and the others. So it's a good day, a great time.
Yeah, definitely. You want to talk about your dad's acquaintances that he used to have that would come down and visit him down in Florida?
Sure, he had a very well known restaurant called Roberto's. I grew up there. It was originally the Maryland Crab House. A really nice man by the name of Bobby DiAgostino ran the place for my dad as Roberto's. His name was Bobby. So, my father's middle name is Robert. And Roberto's, they all came there. I mean, every week it was another who's who of the underworld that were coming through there. Joe Paterno from New Jersey, um, Brother Moscato was down and visited. Guido Pinosi, a real good friend of mine and my dad's. It was like a mentor to me. He was there. So many of them. Sinatra came. Uh,
Patriarcha?
yeah, my dad was friends with him. I'm not sure if he had ever come to the restaurant, but I know that they were close. Sinatra, Paterno, Patriarcha. There's lots of stories that say they had different businesses together, but the only business that I know for sure about was the Playboy Club, the original one in Manhattan. Frank Sinatra, my father, and I believe Jilly Rizzo were partners in that, and that was a really iconic location for a while.
Do you want to tell the people about Johnny, what is it,
Oh,
Robillato, right? With the
yeah,
cat, with
Johnny
the
Robillato. They called him Johnny Roberts. Johnny was my father's mentor, and when my dad was 17 years old, shooting craps in Harlem, uh, Johnny took notice of him and brought him under his wing and basically mentored him into the underworld. Um, Johnny was in with Albert Anastasia, the Mad Hatter, and he was a pretty scary guy himself. Him and his brothers owned a couple of funeral parlors there in New York, but he
and
also loaned money.
if you're owning a funeral parlor, what do you think you're doing? Like on your extracurricular activities, you know?
I just know they they didn't need to hire out.
Yeah, yeah,
But I'll tell you one thing: when he pulled up in a hearse to collect his money, he always got it. They would come outside and hand him the money. He didn't even have to get out of the hearse.
yeah. They're
But my
probably like,
father
here
was
you go.
driving.
Yeah,
Yeah, my father was driving him around and became his protege. And it wasn't long before they formed what was to be the Anastasia family for a short time. And then Johnny was assassinated not long before Albert Anastasia was assassinated, and then it became the Gambino family. And my father was there in the beginning of all that. So uh, he continued on without Johnny Robillato, but um, it was one of the most painful things that my father had ever experienced, from what he told me.
yeah,
My mother said that when he heard that Johnny had been killed, that he walked the alleys of Manhattan in tears, and that was the only time she ever seen him cry. But it's going back to the psychic thing. My mother kind of had or does have that kind of ability in a way, because the night he was killed, my parents would go down to Brooklyn and from Manhattan, and they would drive him home. And this night, for some reason, my mother just didn't want to go. She had a bad feeling. She told my father if he didn't turn the car around, she'd jump out of the car. My father looked in the rear view, and he had it shaved, and he's like, you know what? Someone else to give Johnny a ride home. We'll see him tomorrow. And he turned the car around. And he went home. And that night, my mother had a bad dream, and in the dream there was Johnny Roberts, and he was passing around a plate of figs, and then suddenly she said he was covered in blood in the dream, and she woke up hysterical. She woke my father up. It's 5 in the morning. Told him something happened to Johnny. Call Johnny. And my father's like, "Are you out of your mind? I'm not calling that man at 5 in the morning." And as he's saying it, the phone rings, and it's Jilly Rizzo telling my dad that they had found Johnny shot in Brooklyn. And my dad even then didn't believe it. My mother said he hung up the phone saying, "Not our Johnny, not our Johnny." So I think that hurt my dad a lot, but that's how he wound up being in organized crime, was through his mentor Johnny Roberts.
Yeah, and he did. After that, he just continued in the life.
Yeah, I mean, there's rumors about notches in gun belts and him being a button man and all those type of things, but to me, he was my dad. He was just
Yeah,
just my dad. The fact that he was supposedly a mafia boss or one time button man or whatever that goes with that. Of course, as a young man, it's going to make you you know somewhat astonished and you know interested in that life. But one good thing about my father is he made sure I never went down that road.
yeah, because a
I
lot of
definitely would not. I would
yeah,
not have had his blessing had I tried.
a lot of people following their father's footsteps, in that life.
Yeah, yeah. He
So
made
you're
sure, and my mother made sure that I didn't. She asked me when I was 12 what I wanted to be, and I said a gangster, and she whooped my ass with a belt. Made sure I never said that to anyone again.
yeah,
But I've known a lot of them. I've had friends of them. I've been partners with them. That old cliche. The farther you run from it, the more you run into it, and that's exactly
yeah,
what happened to me. I mean, my father and I were partners in a seafood business called Long Island Seafood in Hollandale, and we didn't work out. So I went on my own, and I was driving a little Honda at the time, and I was talking to my dad when I was leaving. I was telling him I was going to go do my own thing. I said I'm going to be a king in this country one day. My father kind of snickered, and he's sitting on the hood of his Lincoln. He goes, "You see this, son?" And he smoked more cigarettes, those cigarettes. And I go,
mm,
"Yeah." He pointed to his car. He goes, "You see that?" He pointed to this huge seafood plant that was there. I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You see this?" He pointed to it. He had a huge solid gold crab with a 4 carat diamond in the claw. I don't know, some
yeah.
incredible thing. He goes, "This is a king." He goes, "You see that?" He pointed to my car. He goes, "That's a bum." Come see me when you're a king. So it was pretty.
That's
It was pretty
too
hard love.
funny, man.
Uh, but going back to how I would run into it, so I was like, okay, all right. I didn't have a clue what I was going to do, but I had a friend of mine who had just got a job as a valet at this restaurant called the Lobster King, and they had just opened up, and it was the former Bonfire, which was a big mob joint back in the day, and it was owned by Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, and the guy that owns it now was Bugsy Siegel's cousin Harry Siegel. And if you think Bugsy Siegel was off, you didn't know Harry. So Harry opens up this lobster place, and he's talking with the valet, and the valet's telling him, "Hey, my roommate brings lobsters from Canada because I found a place in Canada to bring Maine lobsters, which are the same lobsters, and you got 25% off on the dollar exchange, on the exchange rate with the Canadian money to the American money." So right off the bat, I was making 25%, so I could undercut everybody in town. So from that little Honda, I wound up taking over the lobster business in the late 80s in Miami. I literally had every Chinese restaurant, every place, including my father, as my customer. And how that happened, Bill, and you're going to love this. Harry had this gigantic truck. So when I met Harry, he goes, "Kid, I'm going to make you 10 years beyond your years." He goes, "I'm going to bring you in as my partner." He was no dummy. He knew I had the connection. Nobody else had it.
Yeah,
I had it. And so he made me his partner, which I was thrilled pink. And then he goes, "Now, what's your name?" Because I was going by Cavetti instead of Iacovetti, which was what I did most of my life. And
yeah.
I go, "Well, my real name is Iacovetti." And he goes, "Dave Iacovetti?" I was like, "Oh, God, Like, yeah." He's like, I used to kill people with your father. Ha 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 ha! And he laughed, and I'm like,
Oh
oh Jesus!
man.
And we just left on the not best terms at that moment, me and my dad, which happens sometimes, but we always made up. And he picks up the phone and he dials on speaker. Now Harry's got a gun on. His cousin is there with him, or nephew. He's got a gun on. I don't have a gun, and I'm thinking, you know, if I had lied to this man and he's calling my father, which I knew he was on the speaker, I'm dead. And sure enough, there's
Oh
my father. I
man.
goes, hello. And he goes, it's Harry, Dave. He goes, I got some guy here. He says he's your son. And I go, hi, Pop. And my dad immediately knew because I was always into something. He goes, Harry, that's my son, all right. He goes, I'm telling you right now, I'm not responsible for anything that he does. I know you and I know him, and I'm telling you right now, I'm not responsible. So Harry made me his partner. He had this huge truck with this lion, lobster wearing a crown on it, box truck. So as soon as I got the keys, I went straight to my father's plant, and it's still there to this day. There's a big loading dock in the back, and his
Yeah.
office would fit where he could see the loading dock from a big window. So I purposely backed that Lobster King right into his window. Right, this is like 3 months later, not even a year. Just like 3 months. By the grace of God, it happened. So, and I waited because I knew what he was going to do. Sure enough, he comes flying around on that. Who's this Lobster King? And I'm like, Dad. He goes, oh, wait a minute, son. Wait a minute. And he's yelling at all the guys, like, whose truck is this? Whose truck is I'm like, Dad. He goes, wait a minute. Who the fuck truck is this over here? I go, Dad, it's my truck. He goes, you? You're the Lobster King?
You're like, I told you so.
Customer. He was my best customer after that. He came to the shop every day. I don't think he was ever prouder of me than that episode. But yeah, the partnership with me and Harry didn't last too much longer after that. We went our separate ways. We remained friends, but I wound up opening my own store somewhere else.
So the lobster business, is it lucrative down there in Florida?
It was.
Yeah.
It was. Yeah, it was. But they had we had other people that would sublease different parts of that plant. And my father got indicted later on because of what was going on in New York at the time. And not long after he got indicted, there was a guy that had been bringing swordfish down from somewhere up north, Rhode Island somewhere, and they had found Uzis inside the bellies of the swordfish. They were smuggling Uzis in them, and so they shut the whole property down while my dad was away.
So,
but that was South Florida back then. Anything went. You never knew what to expect.
Yeah, back then it was like the Wild West of the South, right?
Yes.
You said like the guys up north said, you guys are crazy for going down to Florida with all the mosquitoes and shit, because it wasn't like it is now. It was like jungle down there, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's how my dad got the nickname Davy Crockett, which was his real nickname. Fat Dave was the name the government stuck on him, and it stuck. But his nickname with those guys from New York was Davy Crockett because he would go to Florida, he would go to Haiti, he would go to these places that these guys in Brooklyn couldn't imagine at that time, ever going to. And my father, he loved the water, he loved the boats, he loved adventure. So for him, it was a no-brainer. And he had 3 boats down here in Hollandale at one time outside his back door. So if he was in the mood for fishing, he had the fishing boat. If he just wanted a leisurely cruise around the bay, he had that one. And then just for fun, he had a really nice cigarette boat.
Yeah, but your dad had experience with the water, right? You want to talk about what he was dealing with over there?
Yeah.
In Haiti?
So Haiti, I want to play my father in a movie about his adventures in Haiti. And Cuba had just gone south with communism, and the boys were looking for another island to put their casinos on. Joe Bonanno had always been like a nemesis to my father, and I couldn't figure it out. But I would go back in history and read, and then there would always be some connection somehow to Joe Bonanno. And Haiti was not any different. I think my dad might have went there just to get away as far as he could from that guy.
Maybe.
But he wound up following him all the way to Haiti, believe it or not. But what they did is, at that time, John F. Kennedy was president, and the president of Haiti was a guy named Papa Doc Duvalier, and he was a dictator, and he was cold-blooded. He had a Secret Service group of people that were worse than any mob guys could ever be. They were called the Tatar Makut. They carried these special clubs made out of wood and with wooden balls on the end of it, and would crack a person's skull when they hit him with it. But they didn't just use that. They used guns. They used machete. They were just, anybody got in the way, they took them out on his behalf. So John F. Kennedy put an embargo on the island. He didn't want him getting any kind of military weapons because he wanted to see that president out.
Yeah.
And he knew the mob was kind of moving in there too, I guess. So my father, along with Carlo Gambino and some people, put together a freighter of ammunition, bazookas, tanks, machine guns, and then with fast boats, they escorted that freighter into Port-au-Prince through a Navy blockade, and all the while being watched and monitored by the Central Intelligence Agency, and delivering those arms to Papa Doc. And in exchange for that, he was given the rights to casinos there, and he was also given a plantation to have offices there. And they did like a lottery, a modern day lottery today, but this is in the early 60s. And people from all over the world would send money in envelopes and buy these numbers. And then depending on what horses won in the Kentucky Derby, I'm not sure how that was connected, but when they ran that Kentucky Derby, you would know who the lottery winners were, and they would win thousands of dollars, which was a lot more than it is today back then. So they were doing the casinos, they were developing the casinos, and they were running this lottery, and the lottery got up to like $4 million. And they had a couple of guys from New York on the island watching the money. And it was just about time to divvy up the money between Papa Doc and New York. And my father was just about to head to Haiti to get the money. And one of the biggest hurricanes ever hit that island and destroyed the plantation where all the money was. So my father, they got a private plane. They got down to Haiti. They got a car. They went out to the plantation. And when they got there, for as far as you could see, were dead bodies and American money. It was in the muck. It was on the bodies. It was in the grass. And all these Haitian soldiers were there with plastic bags, picking up the money from the muck and putting it in plastic bags. And my father was talking to a general who got on the wire with the palace, Papa Doc, I guess. And as soon as he got off of that call, they turned all their machine guns on my dad and this guy named Gary Kagan, which was a good friend of his and a publicist for Frank Sinatra also. They turned their machine guns on him and they said, "Go tell your boss in New York the partnership is finished." And they put him on a plane and they sent him back to New York. And that's how it ended. And ironically enough, Joe Bonanno wound up getting the rights to the casinos in Haiti.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But I want to play my dad in that movie. I think it would be a different type of gangster movie altogether. And I think that would be fun. And I also think people would like to see that. It'll be something different, but true. And
that would be a real good one, man. That would be a great movie.
Yeah, I was telling you, they had a meeting, though, before the hurricane, and my father and Gary and some other guys from New York were invited to the palace for this dinner, and this was like to begin their partnership. And when they were going into the palace, there was a worker in the front yard. He only had one eye and a big eye, and the Secret Service of the Papa Doc grabbed this guy, and they seen him dragging him into the palace. And they're like, "Wow, what happened? What happened with that guy?" And they're like, "He was caught stealing." And they're like, "Okay, all right." So they have this fabulous buff, dinner, and the servants are bringing one dish after another dish, and all of a sudden it came around dessert time, and Gary is the one who told me the story. He goes, "Yeah," he goes, "I thought they were bringing out some cannolis or something. They bring out this big tray, and it's got a silver lid on it." And then Papa Doc stood up and he says, "And just so you know, when you steal from Papa Doc, this is what happens to you." and the guy took the lid off, and it was the head of that servant that had been caught stealing, with his one eye
Wow.
looking over there and sitting on that tray. So they
And
knew.
you're like, was that meatloaf we just ate? Like, what? Right?
Yeah,
Oh,
my dad didn't tell that story, but Gary did, and he was white as a ghost
oh
when he told it.
man.
I mean, it was like burned into his mind, and that's the kind of dictator that Papa Doc was. You know, he just ruled with an iron fist, and then I guess his son did as well. Uh, but they eventually they got them out of there. Haiti has some history, so there's a lot to work with film wise, as far as, especially when you got a guy like Papa Doc involved. You
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that you can do with that. So, do you want to explain who this guy is?
Right, he's another piece of history. His name is Frankie Carbo. He was the czar of the underworld back in the boxing heydays, and he was also the boyfriend prior to my mother meeting my dad. And he had gone to the he had been wanted by the FBI, and they couldn't find him, but he had heard my mother was going to be at the racetrack, and he went down there looking for my mom, and that's where they caught him leaving the racetrack. And he had asked my mother when he first met her, or not long after, they were really good friends, if she thought it would be all right for a girl her age, she was like 19, 20 at that time, marrying a guy his age. And my mom smiled at him, and she goes, "Yeah, I don't see why not." Uh, but when he went to prison, she wound up meeting my dad, and they formed a relationship. And I guess he knew my dad as well. And he was told in prison, Terry's, she's Dave's girl now, and he was like, they deserve each other. But he has a fascinating story himself, Frankie Carbo. He was a member of Murder Inc. He
Yeah, with
survived. He went on to become a
Anastasia, right?
legitimate, huh?
He was with Anastasia back
I
then when it
believe
was
so.
in the
Yeah,
beginning. Yeah,
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 yeah.
that's pretty crazy. So do you want to explain the situation about Frank Sinatra wanting to adopt you?
Yeah, so what happened was my father would became good friends with Frank Sinatra, ironically, because of my mother. They had broken up. My mother wound up in Las Vegas as Frank Sinatra's guest for 2 weeks out there. They were partying with all of them, Edie Gourmet, Stevie Lawrence, all the greats from back then. Sammy Davis was there. Milton Berle was there. Um, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. So she wound up going back to my dad. But before she left Vegas, Frank Sinatra had asked her, "Where do you hang out in Manhattan?" And she told him Jilly's. And Jilly's was owned by Jilly Rizzo, another icon from those days, a very good friend of Sinatra's and my dad's. And it was a swinging spot in New York. So my mother gets a phone call one day, and it's someone at Jilly's, and they go, "Frank Sinatra's here. He's looking for you. And Dave has him over in the corner." And she's like, "Oh my God." And they became best friends, actually. Him, Sinatra, Jilly. Jilly wound up being with him to the very end. Jilly died tragically in an auto accident because of a drunk driver on his, I believe, 79th birthday, and that pretty much destroyed Frank. Um, but yeah, so Sinatra had offered at one point to adopt me when my mother was pregnant with me. She had been with him in Vegas, I guess, around 9 months or so prior. So it was kind of like, you know. But once I came out and you got a good look at me, there's no doubt I'm my father's
Yeah,
son. You know, I'm not Sinatra's kid. But the
yeah,
CIA showed up to my mom at one point and asked her, "Who's the father of your unborn baby?" You know, and I'm like, "The CIA? Aren't they chasing spies and aliens or something like that?" And my mom, she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "But I think maybe Sinatra had something to do with that." But she would have never gone for that, and I'm glad that they didn't, because then I would have never known my dad. You know, I wouldn't have known
yeah,
any of the things that I know of who I really am and where I really come from, and I can understand myself a lot more. Had I been raised an adopted kid to someone like Frank Sinatra, I would have never known who I was.
Who knows what
You
would
know,
have happened with your life, man?
who knows?
So I want to talk about some of the projects you got going on, like the book that you have, and you want to tell the people where they could get this book and what it's
Sure,
about and stuff.
it's on Amazon Kindle. It's basically a historical account of my father, my mother, some of the stories I mentioned here, some I didn't. Um, what it was like growing up around my dad and his friends. Talks about Cyril DePaggio and some of the things that I did with him back when my father was still alive. He died in 1998. So I will do a second and a third in that series. The second one, I'll talk about my mother and Frankie Carbo and some of those other stories because there's lots. I mean, she knew Charlton Heston, Tony Bennett.
Wow.
I mean, the list is it goes on and on with her. Probably as many people as my dad knows. She said that between her and my father, they knew everybody back then. So
Sounds
I
like
kind of
it.
believe it.
Yeah.
uh, so, so the second one will be about my mother. Actually, I'm working on an audio book with her where she's telling the story herself in her own words. So I want to put that on Audible. Uh,
That would be good, man. I'm
and
looking
then the
forward to
third
that
one,
one.
yeah, a lot of it. I found a lot of people, especially females, when they talked about my dad and the book and the stories, always came up about my mother. And I started realizing, my mom's story is just as interesting as my dad's in her own
Yeah.
way. Um, so hers has to be told. And then, the third one would be about, me as an IRS impersonator, would be crime boss.
That
But
would be a good one too, man. You as a 14-year-old doing all that
yeah,
stuff, that would be an awesome book. You got this one too,
yeah,
right? This is one of the films you got. Or is
correct.
it's
Now
a
that one is my first work of published fiction, and Dr. Minch is based on a true psychiatrist. His name is Gil Lickstein. He's one of the co-authors of the book, and it came from his imagination, and then a little bit of Dave thrown in there. And what it is basically is a psychiatrist goes insane, criminally insane, but no one knows but him, and
yeah,
takes over the underworld and pisses off a lot of mob guys in the government. So they're all coming from him for him. And that's a pretty interesting story that I want to bring to film. We actually have some very big players out of New York and California that are looking at doing that themselves. And if that's the case, I would basically just sign off on that. I wouldn't be doing the production. But when it comes to the ones about Haiti and my father and Frankie Carbo, those I want to have hands on. I want to make sure
yeah,
those are done, true to life as possible. There's enough bullshit, uh, you know, things out there that claim to tell what went on or goes on and so forth. Um, and other people may or may not know the difference. But what I want is to tell the story in an accurate way, the way it should be told. And
yeah,
that's what's really exciting to me. It's not just about making movies or being in the movie business. It's about bringing these stories that I know that I think a lot of other people should know that could appreciate them, bringing those to life, whether it be a book, a documentary, or a film.
yeah. And then you got Mob King by Ciro. Shout out to Ciro.
Yeah, shout out to Zero. He's actually got a movie version of that um, that he's in post production on right now. So you have the television series that's going to be produced in Spain, and then you have the actual Mob King 2.0 movie. I play the Invisible Man in that one.
Hey, man, at least you got a part, right?
Hey, I'll take what I can get, right?
Yeah, man. So what else you got planned for the future? I coming in the next few years.
Well, I'm so glad you asked. I mean, there is just so much, and I have been very blessed to be a late bloomer, and at this stage of my life, I'm 57, going to be 58 here soon. Um, it's like a dream come true. My mother was sick about 4 years ago. I put on a lot of weight. I was a homebody, just taking care of mom. I mean, I really thought I had reached the end of my run for a minute there. And then Cyril came home, and he had been gone 18 years. And he just started making things happen, and he invited me to help be a part of it. And that really motivated me, seeing his success, to put these books out and get these stories done. And then when
Yeah.
I had a success with the first book, the the guys from New York, Joe Lickstein and some other people, Adam DeLuca, they came to me and they said, "Hey Dave, why don't you do this story about Dr. Minch?" And that's how that was created. So a fictional one got put out there. But obviously, the most exciting thing on the table is getting those stories from Haiti and Brooklyn about Frankie Carbo, my mom, my dad, to film and
Yeah.
bring those to life. But I've got a lot next year going on. I've got some people are talking to me about putting me in as a serial killer, actual serial killer that was here in Florida. It was called the Beauty Queen Killer. So we'll see how that comes out. I'm kind of excited about that because I'm definitely not a serial killer type, but I would love to play one on TV.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I have the Hell and Back behind the scenes documentary, and that's going to surprise a lot of people because in life sometimes you're really looking forward to one thing and you have your eyes and heart set on it, and then because of happenstance things change and something really beautiful comes out of what you thought was a loss. And that's what happened with Hell and Back. So we've got a great story to tell uh, with Hell and Back behind the scenes, and that's what I'm doing currently. That'll be out by March. Um, and then, like I said, I've got a couple of documentaries that take place in France, where my daughter and ex-wife live, and it's a beautiful part of the world to be shooting stuff in. So working on that, and I mean, I want to say I'm chasing a dream or whatever, but for me right now, it's a dream I'm living every day. I'm happy with what I have. Anything
Yeah.
else is a bonus. So I can't lose in that situation. There's nothing that I'm striving for. If I was to die tomorrow, I did 90% of everything I wanted to do, and most of it I did correctly, without stealing or without harming or without lying. And I like the guy I see in the mirror, because there's
Yeah.
no skeletons in my closet. A lot of people don't like me. I ain't for everybody. I'm not Mr. Wonderful.
I'm
But
the same way, man. I mean, some
hey,
love me, some don't. I mean, hey, it is what it is. I just want to help people and try to maybe steer the people
exactly.
that are
I
a
love
little wrong.
everybody.
Yeah, I got love for everybody, even the haters, man. All of them.
Hey, yeah, I love my haters too. Without them, it'd be boring, man. I love the love,
Yeah,
but them haters make it fun.
definitely. They do.
but
It's all good,
I,
man.
the
Now
main
go
thing
ahead.
is I wanted to put out a positive energy. Yes, I was a criminal. I wound up doing things I shouldn't do. I paid my dues for it. Um, but I like to think that I matured and I learned from those mistakes, and now I use those mistakes for positive means. So that's a great feeling. So and like I
What?
said, anything else beyond that is definitely a bonus. And I feel like my
Yeah,
dad's spirit is here. I feel him more now than I did when he was alive. As crazy as that sounds, it's like he's back and looking over my shoulder and guiding me. Even if it's only in a dream uh, state.
yeah.
So that's exciting too. I feel like I'm, you know, making him proud up there.
Well, you're a big
Hopefully.
inspiration, man, from like me changing my life to look at someone like you. It shows me where I could be in the future,
Well,
like, and who
bro,
knows what could happen.
you've been kicking butt since I've known you, man. I've known you about a year now, and it's just been positive motion. I love that. I love people like you and Liz Coppola, Cyril DiPaggio, Joey Catalano, all those guys that are out there trying to make things happen. Joe DeBari out of Jersey, he's another great guy. So I wish you guys all the best. Any way I can help, be a part of, definitely, glad to do it. That's what it's about. When I was a teenager, I had a mentor. I was started in radio, and there was a guy named Chuck Zink, and he was Skipper Chuck here in South Florida. He was a pretty famous guy, and he told me that he was helping me because he helped me a lot. He hosted my first radio show for me, which really got me on the map. But he told me, he goes, one day, Dave, you'll understand. He goes, when you succeed, you want to give back. You want to help others succeed. You want to give that knowledge and positive energy. You want to pass it on. So I didn't know what he was talking about then. I do now, and I want to follow that lead.
I don't have everything in the world, but I'm comfortable. So from now until Christmas, anything that I get through any of my apps or YouTube, any donations, I'm going to give it to the homeless shelter to try to help them so they can have a better Christmas this year. Because I know what it's like not to have anything, And
Yes.
if I can do a little bit to help, then I'm doing my part, So if anyone wants to donate, feel free.
We as human beings have so much potential to make this world so much better if we try. And
yeah,
I hope that we, eventually do that without having to move to Mars. Hopefully we get it right down here on Earth and, make it the paradise that it should be. But
yeah, you
lately,
never know
man,
what the future
watching
holds,
the news,
man.
I don't think we're
crazy.
going in that direction.
Yeah, you never know, man.
I'm a positive guy, but it is what it is here. Little grandma's blasting people away at Publix for stepping in front of her. I mean, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, it's insane.
Even I got to take a step back,
It's all good, man. We'll get through it. But, man, I want to thank you for joining me, man. And if you guys don't know, next week I'm going to have Joey Catalano on. And make sure you guys check that out. It's going to be December 2nd at 8 o'clock. And I want to thank you, Dave, for joining me. This was a really good interview. And
thanks for having me, Bill.
Sky's the limit, man.
Yes, sir.
Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell so you can get my videos every time they drop. Until next time, thank you.